Hello guys, in this episode we talk again about the pawn square. In this particular setup we talk about obstacles in the path of the king. As you can see, white has a pawn on a2 and that pawn has a massive pawn square which will go up to g2 and then g8 and a8. That will be a massive square, and obviously our king is in the pawn square. Even if white decides to jump to, then our king is still in the pawn square. Just a quick display of the pawn square in this moment. So the pawn square after white is jumping two squares will be this one. Black king is still in the pawn square, and then he will manage to block the white pawn from converting. So that being the case scenario, white cannot afford to win even if he's the one to move after moving the pawn to a4. But luckily for white, he has this amazing d4 pawn. And once he's pushing his pawn to d5, now black cannot ignore that pawn because that pawn is 3 squares away from transformation, and the black king is outside the pawn square. Obviously, he's behind the pawn. So black has to capture the pawn. Once he takes the white pawn, now we have an obstacle in the path of the king, and that will turn the fate of the game. Now white pushes a4, king moves, and again, for display, we are in the square of the pawn. Yeah, as you can clearly see, the black king finds himself in the square of the pawn, but with a very important obstacle. Now white moves a5, king cannot go to d5 because of his own pawn. Doesn't matter if he flanks it this way or this way, he will lose a tempo because now he's stepping outside the new square of the pawn. See, once he decides to make a move, the black king, even if he goes d4 or e5, he's outside the square now. h6, d6, h7, and the black king cannot prevent the white pawn from converting, and therefore he loses the endgame. So be careful with the obstacles in front of the king.